welcome back to EP World History Modern. Today we're going to begin Unit 9.4. It'll be our first of 2 days looking at this topic. And we're exploring economics in the global age, right? The continuities and changes in the global economy from 1900 to present, and really focusing in on continuities and change in the global economy at the end of the 20th century and beginning of the 21st century. All right, so here's a look at the College Board standards. So we're going to be looking at specifically continuity and change with a few different categories of analysis. One is governments that increase and encouragement of free market policies, such as United States under Reagan, Britain under Thatcher, China under Deng Xiaoping, and Chile under Pinochet. Another category of analysis that we're going to look at for continuities and changes of the global economy is the rise of knowledge economies, or the continuity of knowledge economies, right? So, and we'll talk about that. Asian production and manufacturing economies, Latin American production and manufacturing economies, and some of these economic institutions and regional trade agreements, as well as look at multinational corporations. All right, so to start the day, I generally kind of start the day by kind of introducing Reagan, and I like to kind of show a little Reagan video clip, since a lot of students don't know much about Reagan, or Reagan is kind of a polarizing figure, and he's either Reagan is the greatest thing ever, or Reagan is evil. There's usually not much middle ground when it comes to what students have heard of Reagan. And so let's just talk for a moment about Reagan. And I guess I always kind of like to introduce him by just kind of having students listen to him. We already have listened to an excerpt from his Brandenburg Gate speech when we talked about the end of the Cold War. But he's also known and respected for his speaking abilities and such. So let's just kind of hear him, hear what he has said.
There's a 10-year delay in Soviet Union. One out of 7 families in the Soviet Union. 4 out of 8. It's a 10-year window. And you go through quite a process when you're ready to buy and put up with it in advance. This happened to a fellow. This is their story that they tell of this joke. This man laid down his money, and then the fellow who was in charge said to him, "Okay, you're back in 10 years and get your car." And he said, "Morning, Red." And the fellow behind the counter said, "About 10 years from now, what difference does it make?" And he said, "Well, the water's coming in the morning."
So there are videos out there that have like compilations of Reagan's jokes. It's apparently quite often he would start his speeches with one. So anyway, let's kind of get into it. All right. So throughout the Cold War, many governments encouraged free market policies, and if you're talking about the end of the 20th century and the beginning part of the 21st century, you saw a pretty large movement towards free market policies by numerous governments all over the planet. So there's a couple of different ways that we can kind of look at this. One is Reagan. Sometimes you'll see this referred to as trickle-down theory. Sometimes you'll see it as supply-side economics. Sometimes you'll see it as Reaganomics. Right. So what is it referring to? Right. There is a goal. Reduction of the government intervention into the economy. The general idea behind it is to reduce the amount of governmental spending, be it through government spending on individuals, or could also be a reduction in government spending on subsidies for corporations. Right, so reduce government spending as a whole. Right, reduce income taxes and reduce the amount of regulations. Right, and that's generally one that targets corporations. When you talk about when you talk about these policies, what these policies are, you're generally talking about economic policy. And I just want to give you kind of a specific kind of rundown of what is often kind of connected to Reaganomics and what is, sometimes, viewed to be the kind of foundation for this. And sorry, I wasn't really planning on doing this, but I can't really find anything except for a highlighter handy. How do I not have a pen? Doesn't even make sense. All right, found it. And another highlighter. All right, so when you're talking about this, you'll sometimes see this explained by economists, right? By using the Laffer curve, right? So Laffer curve. So this is get this name from an economist, right? Professor Laffer. I don't remember his first name, right? But when you talk about the Laffer curve, and I am literally just kind of winging this, so who knows? Maybe I'm going to be totally wrong on what I'm about to say right here. But when you look at the Laffer curve, what you're really looking at here is, tax revenue, into the government, right? Tax revenue coming into the government, and you're looking at the overall tax rate, right? The overall tax rate. So as we're going this way, we're seeing like an increase, right? And so what the Laffer curve says, right? And I probably should go to like an economics website to kind of make sure what I'm saying is right, but whatever. I'm going to just wing this. All right. So what the Laffer curve says is that as tax rates increase, right? As tax rates increase, the amount of revenue coming into a government will increase, right? So as tax rates increase, the amount of money, right? The amount of money being generated by the government will increase. So let's just kind of throw some, and these are literally arbitrary numbers that mean nothing. I'm just kind of making this stuff up. It's like 10% tax rate, 20% tax rate, 30% tax rate, 40%, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And let's just say this is, $1 trillion, $2 trillion, $3 trillion, right, whatever, completely arbitrary numbers. All right, so what the Laffer curve tells us is as you raise the tax rate, the amount of money that's going to be coming into the government will increase to a certain point, right? And then as the tax rate continues to go up, at some point you are going to see a decline in tax revenues coming into the government. All right. And right at some point there is a sweet spot, right? So like kind of where's that sweet spot? Somewhere in this kind of general neighborhood. And please remember, these numbers are completely arbitrary. They mean absolutely nothing. All right, so this is what the Laffer curve says, and a lot of when you talk about Reaganomics, right, is kind of based off from that concept, right? So if you can reduce income taxes, that will help increase the amount of revenue coming into the federal government. So when Reagan becomes president, the top marginal tax rate was over 60%. I actually think it was like 72 or something like that comes to mind, but I don't remember exactly. So when Reagan first becomes president, the top marginal tax rate, let's just say over 60%, because I'm pretty confident in that number, was over 60%. And an argument was made that if you reduce taxes, you will actually increase the amount of revenue coming into the federal government. So top marginal tax rates were reduced. And I think the number ended up being like, high 20s, when those first changes were made. And then, because of increasing budget deficits and such, the number was, they eventually shifted it over in real life to around 40, 5% plus or minus 5, I guess, because I'm kind of just winging this completely off the top of my head. All right, but it ended up around 40, maybe 45. I'm not exactly sure. For the top marginal tax rate for the federal income tax. All right. So, but when you talk about Reaganomics, this is the general idea, right? Behind this is that by reducing taxes, right, you will actually increase the amount of money coming into the government, and then there's all the other kind of thoughts behind it. That if you if you are a proponent of this economic theory, you could argue that if corporations pay less money in taxes, that means they'll have more money to spend on research and development. They'll have excess money to hire additional employees. That in turn gives new people jobs, increasing the overall size of the economy. You can kind of go on and on and on. There's a lot of arguments that support this theory. Counter arguments, typically go along the lines of if you reduce the tax rate on corporations, they will use that additional money to give their executives bonuses. They will do stock buyback plans to make their individual shares more expensive, thus enriching their shareholders. Right, there's criticism, right? There's criticism, and then there's support. So, right. So those are kind of typically the lines that you hear, right, about that. As far as because this is the first time that a lot of students are hearing about this kind of stuff. Some students will sometimes wonder, why is it that when we go from a 40% tax to on my random hypothetical example here, a 30% tax, right? Why would you see more money coming in? And this is it is a good question. The way I answer that question is, put yourself into the position of a hypothetical person who makes $2 million, right? So put yourself in a position of a person who makes $2 million, and you hear that, let's say there's a new law coming out that for a new tax law coming out that for every dollar over 1 million, you're gonna have to pay 90% tax on that, right? Let's say, right? So let's just say that's going to be a new law, right? So let's say you were paying 40%, right, taxes on that. So what does that mean? That means your tax burden for just that kind of dollar, the money over $1 million, is going to go from $400,000 if it was a 40% tax to $900,000. That's an additional $500,000 you're going to have to pay in taxes, right? So, right, why if you were that person and you heard about that law being passed, what would you do? Right. So, generally speaking, with that question in mind, students can brainstorm, right? So I'm assuming you watching this at home can brainstorm and figure out what might be the answer to this, right? So if I just find out that I'm going to lose an additional $500,000 a year because of a new tax policy, the first person I'm probably going to go talk to, because I make $2 million a year, is a tax lawyer or a tax accountant, right? And I'm gonna probably try to figure out some tax avoidance strategies that might help me keep my $500,000 that I had in the past. And why when you kind of look at the application of this, this has a lot to do with ideas like I'm going to find deductions. I'm going to find a place to incorporate that is not in that tax location. I'm going to find a tax haven. And of course, we see this kind of locally, right? So we do see this kind of locally. I think, I'm not even sure about this, but I think the state tax in like New York State is like 15%. And we live close enough to Florida to know that a lot of people are moving to Florida right now because the income tax in Florida is 0, right? So if I make my hypothetical $2 million a year, 15% extra money per year on my salary on $2 million is a lot of money, right? So it wouldn't be the actual full 300,000 because of other tax realities, but still, you get the idea, right? So it is a you see a lot of tax avoidance, especially amongst top income earners, right? So top income earners, you will see the massive tax avoidance. If you see like if you apply this to any taxes, not even just kind of top income earners, right? You apply it to the to consumer taxes. I remember when I used to live in New York. Cigarette taxes was very, very high, right? So so it's been a long time since I lived in New York. But when I did live in New York, a pack of brand name cigarettes was like $7 a pack or something like that. So I would hear all the time, mostly from my wife because of where she worked, about people finding tax avoidance strategies so that they could buy cigarettes. So and so is driving to North Carolina on vacation, pick up a couple cartons of cigarettes. I would watch on the news and you would see like U-Haul trucks coming into Manhattan loaded with cigarettes purchased in Georgia, or some other low tax state, and then you'd see them putting the tax stickers on it. You would hear people on the news selling, I think they're called Lucy's, right? A Lucy is, because the pack of cigarettes is so expensive, you could buy a pack for $7, and then just open it up and sell them individually to people for $1 and make $20 off of the thing, or sell it for $20 and make a $12 profit. Just by selling them individually on the street. It's, there's but that way they're more affordable for individuals, right? So this is, there's a lot of different ways to kind of understand this and why this actually works. And it works not just in the corporate tax world or the upper income tax world, but it also, works because of like that Lucy example or the driving U-Hauls full of cartons of cigarettes from North Carolina to New York. That's, we would call those black markets, right? So, when you regulate things and when you overtax things, right, you will encourage the creation of black markets. All right. So anyway, so that's what Reaganomics, that's kind of the idea you often hear behind Reaganomics. The other kind of stuff when you start talking about trickle down and all that kind of stuff, that's the whole with the additional money that people have because they don't have to pay the taxes. That's when they'll create new jobs and grow the overall size of the economy. And I think I've already talked about that. So, because I do remember talking about some of the counter arguments to that. All right. So next, Thatcherism, right? So Thatcherism. So in the late 1970s, Margaret Thatcher becomes the prime minister. I was recently told by my fellow teacher here, Mr. Myers next door, that when Margaret Thatcher, when Prime Minister Thatcher came to Sea Island, she actually planted an oak tree, right? So that there's an oak tree planted on Sea Island, right? Planted by Miss Thatcher. So didn't know that, but a little bit of local history, right? So I'm not allowed on Sea Island. Maybe Sea Island will let me on someday, so I can see the Thatcher tree. All right. So, but I'm not allowed on Sea Island because of private property rights, which, right, you can't say that doesn't go against what Miss Thatcher believed in. All right. So changing British welfare state to a free market system. Right. So, and how does she do this? That's a lot of the similarities with Reaganomics, right? So reduce government spending, reduce income taxes, reduce regulations. So, what you're talking about with Thatcherism is largely unwinding a lot of the policies that were in place in England from the kind of late 40s, 50s, and 60s. It is safe to say that England was a welfare state, or maybe another way to put that is a democratic socialist country, because of the policies that were enacted in the post-World War II era. And what Thatcher will do is she will take a lot of these sectors of the economy in England that had been nationalized, and she will privatize them, right? So unwind those democratic socialist policies, and you're going to see a lot more kind of a movement towards free market beliefs and policies under her. The results were pretty clear by the early to mid 80s of these moves, and you're going to see other European countries following suit. So other countries that had instituted democratic socialist policies in the 50s and 60s and 70s, such as Denmark and Sweden, for example, those countries, by the time you get into the early 1990s, are going to begin to unwind their democratic socialist policies. And to the point where today you could probably make an argument that countries like Sweden are more, kind of have more free market policies than the United States does. Next, Deng Xiaoping, right? And so socialism with Chinese characteristics, right? Socialism with Chinese characteristics. So the goal is to open communist China to free markets while maintaining communist control. And of course, sought foreign investments, right? So if you're talking about Deng Xiaoping, and what he actually does, I guess since I have this up, might as well continue to use this, right? If you're looking at what he's doing, all right. So, I'm going to pause for just 1 second. Sure. What's that? No. Yeah, go ahead. Whatever.
Hey, class. How you doing? It's Caleb.
There you go. All right. So, all right, have a good day. All right. So, if you're talking about what Deng actually does, right? So, the policies of Deng Xiaoping and right, what we see here. I see on social media a lot that there's a lot of controversy associated with that whole horseshoe policy, or this whole horseshoe idea, right? And right, where we can put socialism, right? Socialism versus fascism, right? So if you ever do find a good link that actually gives some evidence-based reason based on not theory but actual practice, I would love it if you would actually email me that, because I'm, as far as that is a valid criticism of this. All right. So, but anyway, let's kind of get what I'm saying. So, what does Deng do, right? Deng, right? Because we kind of talked about what's going on over here. If you're talking about Stalinism / Maoism, right? Because I definitely do concede that there is a big difference between Stalinism or Maoism, right? And fascism. What we're talking about is under Deng Xiaoping is we are transitioning towards something different here, right? So where does he, how far does he transition? All right. So, you could make an argument that he transitions China to like a Leninist, right? Leninism / like a new economic policy kind of thing, where we have, right? We are maintaining autocratic, right? We are maintaining our autocratic regime. You could make an argument, right, that he is, allowing free market reforms to be made, but maintaining state control over things. Or you could make an argument that he creates a corporatist, right, a corporatist economy with an autocratic regime, right, a corporatist economy with an autocratic regime, where the government still controls things like the raw materials and whatnot, and access to that kind of stuff and decision making, which is what fascism is, right? So, there are interesting cases to be made, right? So, said, this is not my area of expertise. So, I'm not going to claim to be an expert on this. I am not a professor on this, writing books on this. But I think there are interesting arguments with evidence to be made about certain regimes that have existed in the 80s, especially that we often don't think of as fascist. Like, for example, I think a case could be made for South Africa. Right? I think that's a good example, right, of a case you could make in the 80s, right? So, but anyway, so maybe Deng Xiaoping, right, is kind of making this transition, to a socialist with Chinese characteristics. But what is that? We got to make our comparisons. Right? We need to make our comparisons based on evidence, with regimes that have existed in the past. All right. So, I think an argument could be made for a Leninist, right, MEP style reforms made under him, and maybe after him, you're seeing more of a kind of the post Deng Xiaoping era. So in the 90s and 2000s, you're going to see the rise of a corporatist economy with an autocratic regime. So, maybe you can make an argument for fascism today, right? Maybe, right? So, but anyway, those are the policy changes that we're going to see under him. As far as Pinochet is concerned, this is a kind of a good example of, like, when you look at the economies of these countries, like you do, if you're going to look at China today under Xi Jinping, you almost have to, preface your statement with, right, if you can put aside the genocide and the human rights concerns that you have, then China's economy is right, and you kind of have to do the same with Chile here. Is if you can get aside the 3,000 plus people who die and 100,000 plus people who are imprisoned, kind of clear human rights violations under him, then the economic reforms, and so we talk about him. It's just kind of, you do have to kind of preface this kind of stuff, but we do see market reforms made. The Allende regime's, nationalization policies get unwound, and we see privatization of numerous industries. The application of, like, Milton Friedman's economic beliefs, so sometimes called the Chicago Boys. These are free market economic principles being applied. Of course, we've already kind of talked about, the economic miracle, really in the 80s, right? There's definitely a dip in the early 80s, but, the late 70s and then through the 1980s. All right. So large scale privatization, economic liberalization, et cetera, et cetera. All right. All right. Our next category of analysis is knowledge economies, right? Knowledge economies. And this is one of those things where, you can view it as a continuity, as a topic that you can look at in history. So when our course first begins, who is the most innovative economy on the planet? You could make a case for Song Dynasty China, right? So if you look at some of the kind of monetary, banking practices and the such, very, very interesting, right? So, so when we kind of take it up to a little bit more recently here, who was the dominant knowledge economy in the late 1700s, early 1800s? Right? Hopefully, you're thinking about England or Great Britain, right? Who are the new leading knowledge economies in the 1850s and 60s? The second industrial revolution. Hopefully, what's coming to your mind is the United States and Germany. Right? United States and Germany. So knowledge economies, right? So historically, you would have, like, large blocks of time, right, with a couple of different countries being knowledge economies. Today, where technology moves so fast and knowledge is spreads so fast that who is a knowledge economy and when is it's something that might be fleeting, or it's something that there might be overlap because of knowledge specialization. So, but really what we're talking about is countries that get a large degree of their GDP from businesses, right, that are based on higher levels of education, right, higher skill sets, technology, right, information, communication. All right, so that's largely what we're talking about here. So the United States, right, we've been we've kind of come and gone as the leader in different sectors in the knowledge economy. We definitely hit a nice little high point when it comes to internet and computer, right, in the 90s. We definitely hit a good high point when it comes to cell phone technology in the mid 2000s, right, kind of 2000, 2006, 7, 8, or 2007 and 8. There's different moments, right, where peaks occur, and then, right. So Japan, right, Japan definitely had a great moment in in the 60s and 70s and most of the 80s, I guess. Looking at electronics and automobiles, automobile innovation. Finland had a kind of a great moment in the 90s, in early 2000s, right, with kind of dominating the cell phone industry. Right, so I don't know what's going there. It is. Right, so kind of dominating the cell phone industry, like Nokia. If you were alive in the early 2000s, you know that little Nokia sound. Anyway, knowledge economies is another category of analysis. Another category of analysis is production or manufacturing economies. And this is kind of a good little preface. Just because you manufacture a lot doesn't make you a production economy. Like the United States, we produce, we're one of the largest producers on planet Earth. But that is not a dominant share of our GDP, right? So Vietnam, 40% of Vietnam's GDP comes from production and manufacturing, whereas even though we produce, right, a very large volume of goods, it only accounts for approximately 11% of our GDP, right? So Vietnam, if you're wearing a pair of Nikes, it's probably made in Vietnam. Right, so Bangladesh, we've already watched a video on that, right? And of course, Mexico, we're going to talk about NAFTA in a minute, right? Honduras. So, for you to pause and read through. All right, next one. Economic institutions and trade agreements. All right, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, just because I know most of my students who come to me come up through some fabulous teachers at the middle school, and in sixth grade, because of the Georgia curriculum, NAFTA is part of that sixth grade curriculum. So most kids come in, knowing NAFTA front and back. So you kind of get that in. You can apply that to Mercosur in South America, your knowledge on NAFTA to ASEAN, right? So, but in case you are, you didn't have the, the benefit of, coming through Miss Murray's class. Let me just say this about NAFTA, right? So my NAFTA in 30 seconds, right, which will probably actually be 3 minutes. But here we go. So NAFTA was passed in 1994 under the Clinton administration. It was largely negotiated under the Bush administration before him, though. And it creates a tariff-free zone, right? So between Canada, the United States, and Mexico. There's going to be some reaction against this on both sides, right? So people are in opposition to this on both sides. The most famous case from Mexico would probably be the Zapatistas, right? So the Zapatistas are largely peasant farmers from the Champa region down in the southwest portion of Mexico. And the Zapatistas were, they kind of rose up in rebellion, right, or at least rose up in opposition and then eventual rebellion against NAFTA because they were, small peasant farmers pitted against corporate industrial farmers, and unable to compete. Right? Unable to compete against that. As far as in the United States, there is opposition to NAFTA, concern about NAFTA as well. A case could definitely be made that a number of manufacturing facilities, were shut down as a result of creating that kind of tariff-free zone. So especially hard-hitter places in the Midwest, right? And of course, during this exact same time, we see the rise of the sometimes referred to as the maquiladoras, the factories on the Mexican side of the border. All right, so that's when you talk about the kind of the argument against, right? That's generally what you talk about is loss of jobs, or inability to compete. As far as the positive sides of things, from an economist perspective, they're going to say that by eliminating tariffs, you allow comparative advantage to to become the dominant factor in determining what gets produced inside countries. Right, and as a result of that, it results in increased efficiency for the economy, Cases can also be made that this is a win-win. This is a win for the American consumer, assuming that you are an American consumer who didn't lose your job to Mexico. But so if you are not that, if you are not that person, then you're going to benefit from cheaper goods, on a whole host of products, from automobiles to watermelons, right? So so for the average American consumer, right, it means that prices are going to stay low, right, for long periods of time, right? Which is why the price of a Ford is not that dramatically different than what it was 30 years ago, right? So that's that's pretty, and you probably learned a lot more than just that, right? That's just kind of the nutshell kind of stuff. As far as WTO, this is kind of the massive trade organization, and we're going to talk about some opposition and arguments against the WTO in a few days. And, it is definitely a controversial organization. The WTO is, highly protested. If you live through the WTO protests on the West Coast, Seattle, Portland, 20 years ago, then, you probably know what the WTO is. Canada as well. It's they're in the news whenever they meet, right? Whenever there's a WTO meeting. So it is a controversial organization. They become a major source of news in 2001 when China is admitted into the WTO. That's going to change China's fortune. And also, there sometimes you'll hear people will talk about some of the positives of the WTO, and they'll often put this like resolution of disputes. There is a mediation aspect to the WTO that is often touted as a positive thing. It's often also criticized as one of the failures of the WTO, that we have this kind of interesting idea that a trade dispute could be resolved through mediation. However, the backlog and the not replacing mediators, right, judges, has resulted in a massive backlog, with this, and has ultimately shown to be a failure, all right, of the WTO. All right, so one of many. All right, so moving on. All right, so multinational corporations. I don't know why these specific, corporations were chosen, right, to be on the list. I can take some guesses, all right? So this is kind of one of the issues when you're getting like this close to history. When I first saw Mahindra on there 2 years ago, I'm going to be honest with you, I am not in the farming industry, and I was not very familiar with it. So like when I was when I was starting to kind of dig in and try to figure out what these companies are, I really had to kind of like look, right, kind of do some digging. So who is Mahindra? So, first off, I had to figure out that they're based out of Mumbai, right? So they're based out of India. There is an automobile sector, but largely when you talk about them internationally, you're looking at the agricultural sector. So, all I can really do is make assertions of why I think the College Board would have chosen to put this on there. So here's my basic assertion. I'm going to guess Mahindra was chosen because they are an agricultural manufacturer, right? They produce tractors and the such. And the Green Revolution is also something that is on the College Board framework. And even though the Green Revolution is something we often kind of look at as far as a corporate perspective, a lot of American corporations, like the Monsanto Corporation, for example, that does the genetically modified seeds, or the various pesticide corporations, Dow Chemical, right, and the such. Even though there is a lot of kind of European and American corporations that we associate with the Green Revolution, where it actually has kind of some of the early greatest benefit is going to be in India. And it does make sense that in India you're going to see the rise of a manufacturing sector of their economy that complements that rising agricultural growth that's going on, and independence that's going on. So that's just kind of my shot in the dark kind of guess, right? So I'm just right? So they make a lot of tractors, right? That in itself is not enough to be significant. I'm going to guess it is to help you make a connection between the Green Revolution, right, and then them as helping them grow to become a multinational corporation. We even have a Mahindra dealer here in our county, right? So if you listen to kind of local radio, you'll often hear the word Mahindra. So now hopefully you'll recognize it, right? As far as Nissan, right, Nissan Motor Company is concerned, I don't know. I'm not even going to take a guess on that one. I mean, they're huge, and I guess they're just an example, right? So, but I don't know. All right. So, as far as Nestle, let's kind of see here. Why would Nestle be on this? Since we just talked about environmental yesterday, they are the largest, second largest plastic polluter, like single-use plastics, and that's an environmental concern, right? Is single-use plastic. So maybe it's good to point that out, right? They are the largest food supplier, right, on Earth. So maybe that's part of the story. And I guess this is from kind of tomorrow's video, but let me just kind of scroll down and show you here. So I do have this little infographic here. When you're talking about Nestle, this is their little universe of brands, right? So something I'm sure all of you have heard of. All right, so I'm gonna feel free to pause if you want to look at this more. All right, but I'm gonna get out of the screen and go back. All right, so why Nestle? I don't know. Well, let me just kind of make another assertion here. All right, why Nestle? Maybe the continuity part of this is that we're really talking about transnational corporations. Now we're talking about multinational corporations. What are some of the concerns associated with transnational corporations? A lot of the concern with transnational corporations was what was going on, in countries outside of where they're headquartered. For example, the United Fruit Company, right? So what would a continuity be, right? Regarding behavior outside of the country of origin, right? And the answer to that would be, what is going on down the supply chain, right? So what's kind of going on, down deep in the supply chain. So about a decade ago, there was some concerns raised about what was going on the cocoa bean plantations in West Africa, in which Nestle was sourcing, some of their chocolate from. There were allegations that some children were being kidnapped, some children were being enslaved, by the subcontractors, right, whom Nestle was sourcing their chocolate from, right? So I guess you could make a kind of a continuity argument, about exploitation, right, of workforce. You could make a comparison argument, right? And of course, this is kind of one of those just ethical questions. Is there any culpability of a corporation like Nestle, to be responsible for for the behavior of people whom they are sourcing some of their goods from? At what point in the supply chain do they not have control over? Right? Obviously, they have control over anything, right, in their own corporate factories, but you have to buy stuff from people in order to survive as a multinational corporation. So at what point does culpability end? Right? So, and you can make the same argument with, really anything at all, Apple, or Android, Samsung. Right, you can make an argument about how they are sourcing their rare earth minerals like coltan, and at what point are you not responsible? And of course, if you are a firm believer that no company should ever exist unless they are 100% human rights sourced, environmentally friendly sourced goods, if that is your position, then you probably have to realize that those businesses will not survive in a competitive environment. right? So, because other companies will source, so, I guess one has to make an argument, and these are the kinds of things that you will probably be, having discussions when you are a college student. Maybe an attempt to source appropriately, is probably the greatest thing you could hope for at this particular moment. Is Apple trying to source their rare earths in a way that does not result in the kidnapping and exploitation of children by militia groups? Are they making an effort to only source their goods from people who certify that has come like that? Is Nestle attempting to only source their chocolates, right, from people who certify that they do not use children who've been kidnapped or enslaved? This is it is an interesting debate, right? Interesting question. And it is a continuity. So how are things sourced, and the human rights abuses that often become apparent. All right, so that's the major stuff for today. I'm going to kind of do a quick little rundown of Deng Xiaoping. But if you're really watching this is you're welcome to end this video at this point if you're one of my students who doesn't want to do a little bit more information about Deng Xiaoping. Right. So, but if you want to stay on, here we go. So, sometimes in class I have time. It depends on the class. Sometimes there's not much questions, and I'll have time to kind of dig deep into, not dig deep, but to kind of do a little bit about Deng Xiaoping, just as like a further case study. So let's kind of run through him real quick. So Deng comes to power following the death of Mao. Mao dies in 76. Deng Xiaoping is firmly in power by 78. And you're going to see a continuation of the opening of relations with the United States that had started under Mao a few years earlier. You'll often associate his kind of early years with the four modernizations, right? So a targeted modernization campaign, and to try to situate China in a position for growth. Oftentimes you'll hear talk about one-child policy. So just so that you've seen it, these are the years in which it kind of peaked. You did start to see some loosening of it, and today it is largely gone, right? So, and of course, there's implications. I think I've talked about all those in different videos. All right, so when you look at Deng Xiaoping, right? So, if you're looking at GDP from 52 up until 2005. Once we get past the Mao years and we're starting to see the kind of implementation of these special economic zones, these SEZs, and of course that will expand and that will grow. And, so you see some pretty dramatic growth under Deng Xiaoping, right? In all sectors of the economy. So kind of very famously, KFC, right? KFC comes to China. So I took this picture before I went in and ate there. So it's kind of interesting when you do go in to eat there. As someone who does not speak Mandarin, they'll give you a little picture menu and you can just point. But yeah, in a lot of countries within tourist areas, you'll have an English speaker at the counter. But in China, not at all, right? No, they did not feel compelled to have someone who speaks English here. And this is literally across the street from a diagonal from Tiananmen Square. All right, so under Deng Xiaoping, just kind of talking about this, obviously the events of 1989 happened. And when you talk about the events of 1989 and all of this, generally in class we'll watch a little bit of the Tank Man video. It's very easy to find this kind of stuff. Let me pull this off. All right, so I probably should have had that pulled up and ready, but generally we'll watch this for a few seconds. All right, so so what do you think is going to happen? I mean, what is going to happen to this guy? And what's what and of course, I always kind of like to point out, if you're talking about talking about that man is standing in front of the tanks. He's standing in front of the tanks. Not before Tiananmen Square had been cleaned out. He is standing in front of those tanks the day after the protesters had been cleaned out. So if you're not familiar with this, a pro-democracy protester, had died, or an advocate had died, right? And his supporters, some pro-democracy, mostly students, began to gather at Tiananmen Square, and it really goes back to April, right? It goes back to April. So they began to gather and camp out in Tiananmen Square, and that'll go on right until early June, right? So this is a long protest. They'll have a little statue, right? Goddess of democracy, and so this will go on for weeks, right? And then I think it's the exact date, June 4th, I think. I probably should know this kind of stuff, right? So June 4th, right? So June 4th, I did know it, so that makes me look okay. All right, so on June 4th, the Chinese government decides they're going to clean, they're going to end this. So they go in and they will, clean out Tiananmen Square, kick everyone out of the square. And then what happens next is in the city streets surrounding Tiananmen Square, you're going to have the Chinese military opening fire on their own citizens. The official Chinese number is in the low hundreds. The Red Cross number is around 2,000. I recently saw I think it was on the BBC website. They're publishing numbers that they believe are accurate now, and they put the number around 10,000 people were killed in the cleaning out of that, of Tiananmen Square, right? The ending of that protest movement. So when you think about the tank man, he is, he is doing this the morning or the day after those people were killed, after the massacre that occurred by the Chinese government. All right, so but anyway, when we talk about China and Deng Xiaoping, right? In the late 1980s, why does Gorbachev fail to hold his country together and the Soviet Union collapse? And why does Deng Xiaoping, how is he able to survive this moment where you have this pro-freedom and democracy and liberalization? How does he survive this moment where Gorbachev fails to keep things together? I think a conclusion can be drawn, right? That that this transition that China was undergoing economically, was aided because of just how much the bureaucracy and centralization was destroyed by the Cultural Revolution, by that moral panic that was the Cultural Revolution. It put, it largely decentralized, a lot of aspects of China, and of course the other thing is that he's experienced and he'd been around, and whereas Gorbachev was relatively new. So Deng Xiaoping was able to negotiate politically this. So what we see, in the aftermath of this, right, in the aftermath of 1989, is it's sometimes referred to as the unofficial agreement between the Chinese government and its people, that you do not ask for political freedom, you do not ask for civil liberties, you do not ask for freedom of speech. Okay, don't ask for that, right? No government freedom at all, right? And you can have your free economy, right? You can have a free market economy. You can have your corporatist economy. So, right, they remain autocratic and they transition to become, a corporatist market economy, right? With government controls on a lot of things, right? So especially raw materials and such, right? So what we're seeing happen in that kind of post 89 is, and this is simply looking at trade balance specifically with the United States, but obviously the United States, we were okay with this arrangement made by the Chinese government and its people, right? If you want to kind of view it like that, right? So you can see the U.S. trade balance, right? So, or the U.S. trade deficit with China increases dramatically through the 1990s. And then, of course, China enters into the WTO, and things explode in China, right? And you can see that also in that chart I showed you earlier. You can see here when China enters the WTO, their growth goes from this to that, right? So it was already growing really fast, anyway, but you've just seen exponential growth, after WTO entry. All right, so what's the main idea of this cartoon? There you go. All right. Vietnam. This is kind of looking at economic growth in Vietnam. All right, and lastly, let's just talk for a moment about Xi Jinping, and because this is you're definitely seeing kind of interesting figures, when it comes to kind of post Maoist China. Deng is a major reforms, major changes made, and the same could also be said about what happens under Deng Xiaoping, right? So major changes are happening. Some people, right, will argue that there's a cult of personality that has been kind of forming. When I was in Beijing, there are shops that sell this kind of stuff. And is that a big deal? Is that nationalism and gone awry? Probably not, right? But what you can say though is that the way that Xi Jinping is portrayed in state media is different than his predecessors, right? And you could also make an argument that he has made himself now premier for life, right? President for life, and so you're unlike the predecessors from Deng Xiaoping until him that you have, who run a couple terms and then step down. He's going to be in power for the foreseeable future. And there's some interesting kind of videos on this. But real quick, let's just talk about Belt and Road really quick, right? So, Belt and Road is an initiative that begins around 2013, announced around 2013, and you could make an argument that this is the beginning of a change within China, and really, it's a change that we had not seen since the early Ming Dynasty. That we're seeing, some imperialism coming from China here, right? So economic imperialism, So let's kind of take a look at some of these videos, because right? they're pretty quick and interesting. Right, so this is off from a French television. All right. And
What does it mean to me?
By the commercial on here. All right, here we go.
A focus report. It takes a closer look at President Xi Jinping in China. 6 years after taking over the world's most populous country, he's now changed the rules so that he can serve indefinitely as president. Despite never giving interviews, the Chinese press runs regular front-page stories on him. In fact, as our reporters show, he is omnipresent and at home overall ultra-popular, seen as the man to combat corruption. But he's also one of the most authoritarian leaders in power today. Sarah Umara and Antoine Vidaye sent us this report.
A friendly-looking man with the assurance of someone who knows he is untouchable. Xi Jinping walked towards unlimited and unrestricted power. The 3,000 Chinese deputies have removed the limit of 2 presidential terms. It is the coronation of China's strongest man, thanks to a cult of personality. In this antiques market in Beijing, the cult of personality around Mao Zedong remains intact 40 years after the death of the great helmsman. But now on the stalls, we also find busts of the effigy of Xi Jinping.
I think there are a lot of people interested. We do that because we respect him. He's a great man of our time. He won the hearts of the people.
Today, President Xi Jinping is also present on posters, cups, and plates. We put him in our houses to protect our home and bring good fortune. Xi Jinping, a lucky charm president, the most popular since Mao. The Chinese even call him Xi Dada, Uncle Xi.
I think this nickname is a sign of respect. He governs well.
I love him. I think that his policy for the country is very good and good for the people.
The Chinese president has forged his leadership in China by strengthening his position with the press.
That's selling well. I already sold everything, and this copy's the last one.
Beijing's leader regularly appears on the front page of every newspaper and in every news item. The writer Wu Rong Chun, whose books are banned by mainland China, notes his overwhelming presence.
Here on the front page, the big title is Xi Jinping, blah, blah, blah. I do not even want to read anymore. And he's also there just below. In recent years, hardly a day goes by without Xi's photo in official newspapers.
All media outlets are under orders. In 2016, he visited the editorial offices of the Chinese media. He received a triumphant welcome. He even sat down in an editor's seat.
So, thanks to this propaganda machine, he is not only the political leader of the country, but also the mayor of thoughts and the idol of the people. He's a model of morality. In fact, it's like he's a god. I see. So,
the press often echoes the president's ultra-nationalist program. This is Xi Jinping's Chinese dream. Under his presidency, patriotism has been exacerbated. Military power reaffirmed. Xi Jinping does not hesitate to stage himself as chief of the armies launched to conquer the world. His goal, to restore the image of China. This theory of the Chinese dream was first written about by a former colonel of the Red Army. He is betting on the decline of the United States to make Xi Jinping and China the masters of the world.
So much more is the Chinese dream. To summarize the rebirth of the Chinese nation. First, China has to go beyond the United States economically, and that will be done very quickly. Look at the level of values China has before the United States, and it will be the Chinese values now dominate the world.
Before becoming perhaps the master of the world, Xi Jinping has emerged as the undisputed leader of China by eliminating its opponents and by deciding the role of civil society. Since taking office, Xi Jinping has been campaigning for anti-corruption. This has made him popular and has also allowed him to eliminate his political opponents. No more competition within the party and no more space for dissident voices inside the civil society. While Xi Jinping has opened the way to a presidency for life, this famous dissident is worried about a drift towards authoritarianism.
China today is a scary country. It's funded by the ideology of weapons. With this change, Xi Jinping will further strengthen control over its officials. The purpose of the modification of the constitution is to appropriate more power. Place this in government, take all kinds of measures to control society. So what? The regime is becoming like North Korea.
Since the change in the constitution, a photo montage has circulated on Chinese social media. Xi Jinping's portrait replaced Mao's portrait at the entrance of the Forbidden City in Beijing, an image that was quickly censored. You can't joke with the new emperor of China.
And I will say that last statement that was made, I went there after that video was, that comment was made, and I saw Mao's picture there. I didn't see Xi Jinping's, so that may have been temporary. All right, so that's it for that one. All right. I'm not going to watch this, but just so you can kind of see what it would be, what it is. So this is from Chinese Daily. You can see our little contextualization warning here. This China Daily is funded in older part by the Chinese government. So the Chinese government creates these videos, and let's go.
Now this, I'm going to the board.
What's that?
Okay.
So the Chinese government has, paid very famous and well-known, American authors to help make these videos to help people understand what Belt and Road is. And I guess why not watch this? Now, you can skip over this if you want. I'll try to share this link on the page, but let's just go. I'm going to play it for the next 2 minutes. Why not?
Once upon a time, somewhere else, from Central Asia, Europe, it was called Silk Road. People would put things on camels across the desert to trade with other people.
Like country sharing?
Yeah, and later, ships traveled from China to Southeast Asia to Africa, and they bring things back to China like giraffes.
Is that how the baby Jew got that?
No, that was a long time ago. Well,
Hopefully, he's referencing Zhang Ha there.
China's okay, because we can make routes like the old routes, but something big. It's called Belt and Initiative. More stuff can move around the world more easily, and people can travel more easily and build things easily.
That's good.
This form is a chance to tell the world about the Belt and Road. And I'm telling you, lots of countries' leaders will be there. They'll talk and inform about its future.
About how country will use camels to carry stuff.
No, new things like highways, railways, and airports, and even pipelines and internet.
So is this a movie for plans?
That's a big part of it. There's a lot more.
What else?
I'll tell you tomorrow. Okay, I'm going to go to sleep. Love you.
All right, so that definitely can't be a bad thing at all for anybody. Just kind of reviving the Silk Road, right? So, reviving the Indian Ocean trade zone. So it's actually interesting idea of messaging coming from the Chinese government on this one, because that does seem very innocent and not concerning at all. However, there's been kind of going beyond the scope of this class, to kind of start digging into this kind of stuff, but there are some negative sides of this as well. I think NPR did a pretty good piece a few years back looking at the debt traps associated with the railroad projects going on in Kenya, or what happened with, some of the ports in, I don't know if it was Malaysia or Indonesia, right? But there's a number of different stories of, loans being given and then inability to pay back those loans, by these countries, and the Chinese government coming in and taking over, what used to be, nationalized components of these regimes. I know there's also a lot of talk with Pakistan as well, building a port there in more recent years. So Belt and Road is, at the kind of the most innocent. It is, a revival of ancient trade routes. At most insidious, it is economic imperialism, with the, maybe with the intent to actually imperialize and begin to take over additional places, like, for example, Taiwan, as a starting point, or maybe other places, right? So there's concern, right? There's concern from the outside world. As far as the Chinese values, right, are as far as replacing, there's been plenty of criticism of Western values, and should Western values be adopted all over the world, and so the Chinese are positioning themselves as a counter to Western values, right? Which is an interesting way to position yourself, right? And may find a lot of traction by doing so. All right, so there's also that that video, the Scramble for Africa, which I guess I'll link this one again, because the Scramble for Africa does reference Belt and Road. It does reference Belt and Road, and basically how China has positioned itself. And this is a piece that was done by The Economist a few years back. And very well done piece looking at the kind of Africa-specific implications of Belt and Road Initiative. All right, so some key takeaways, right? World Bank, IMF, right? A little kind of rundown of what they supported, right? Favored reduction of tariffs, free global market, movement of capital, mobility, mobile and temporary workforce, right? It should be mobility of labor, privatization of state-run enterprises, curtailing of government efforts to regulate the economy, right? And both tax and spending cuts, right? One of the other things you're starting to see today is, or right now, there's a discussion going on about maybe having a common corporate tax, right? Maybe there needs to be a common corporate tax around the world. That would be one way to get around the Laffer curve. Okay. So we'll see how these kind of additional, I guess what would be an anti-free market reform. We'll see how those work out, and how the IMF and World Bank, kind of how they're involved in those kinds of discussions in the coming years. All right, that is all for today. Sapriati.